really kind. But today is not about me, it's about you, and I'm very honored to be here today. Warm greetings to all of you graduates and to your families. For me, it's very nostalgic to be back here at Western today, but more importantly, it's really quite thrilling to share this day with you today. I know how important it was to me, and I can imagine how important it is to your families. So here you are. You've now written your last law school exam. You've drunk your last cup of high voltage coffee from the chambers. And you spent your last long hours cramming for exams in the stacks at the library. I know, I did it too. Today is a genuine milestone, a day that begins what I sincerely hope will be a journey of increasingly important milestone opportunities for each of you. I'd like to suggest that you celebrate today, or try to celebrate it, from the perspective of that younger, less cynical you who once was. And think back to when you first thought about maybe attending law school. Think back to going in to write that LSAT examination with likely equal measures of anxiety and adrenaline. And think back to when you excitedly heard the news that you were accepted into law school and chose to make Western your choice. That younger you was very excited about the prospect of today. So try to recall those earlier feelings, if you will, for a moment, and revel in what you've accomplished. Because you have accomplished a great deal. You have. Your family is so proud to be here today. You worked hard to make it into law school, and you worked even harder to get out. I'd also encourage you today to give credit to your family members who helped support you through this. They worked harder as well, and hard in ways that you probably don't fully understand. As you go through your professional careers, you're going to increasingly realize that nobody gets there alone. We all need help. We're going to have plenty of opportunity to applaud our graduates today, but right now I'd like us to take a moment to applaud your families. Speaking from experience, today is a day you're certainly going to remember. Also speaking from my own convocation experience, what I'm going to say today is something you're certainly going to forget. I find this last part strangely comforting. So let me begin. When seeking ideas on what I should try to convey today to this enormously talented group of bright young graduates, I got plenty of advice. Be inspiring, be funny, be personal, don't be boring. Watch Steve Jobs' address at convocation. I thought maybe that was a pretty high threshold. So instead I reflected on why I was chosen to speak here today. I'm not a famous jurist. I'm not a lawyer turned wildly successful entrepreneur. And I'm not an accomplished scholar. Rightly or wrongly, I concluded it could be one of three things. I'm a woman. Increasingly, our law schools graduate more women than men, somewhat. I'm ancient. I couldn't bring myself to say old. Ancient sounded better. And I can look back on the last quarter century and explain what happened in law over your lifetimes, from the vantage point of both business and practice. I'm CEO of one of Canada's leading law firms, I think I can call it that, at a time of major industry change. And I might have the hubris to attempt to predict the future of private practice. I'll try to work with all three of these themes as guideposts for my remarks today. But you'll also hear what I consider to be some fundamental truths about three things. Learning from failure, making your own opportunities, and what I believe success really looks like at the end of the day. I'll also do my best to try to remember I'm one of the few things between you and your celebratory lunch. So starting in with my own personal story, yes, I'm a woman. I'm still in the world of law. How did that happen? I'm a firm believer that where you came from has a lot to do, where you get to in life has a lot to do with where you came from. It often has much to do with the level of motivation and determination that you call upon. In my case, I'm from a small northern mining town, Timmins. It's better known as the home of Shania Twain. A lot of hockey players in the NHL. I can't sing, I did play hockey. For the law school. More importantly, when I was growing up, it was a town of new Canadians, and my parents were among them. Like many of their generation, neither finished high school because the Depression and World War II intervened. However, they wanted and expected better for me. My father encouraged me, as his only child, to compete with those of his gender at anything and everything. Sports, hunting and fishing, and academics. And my mother set her own example for me. She continued to work after marriage and was an intellectual and economic equal with my father at a time when that was not so customary. I grew up thinking I could do anything I chose, even if I was a girl. It wasn't so much that my mother was reading Germaine Greer and telling me that I could overcome the obstacles of my gender. It was more about a blind faith that there were no obstacles, and that I could simply go after what I wanted. And with hard work and determination, there was no reason I shouldn't succeed. These were the values my parents taught me. Now, the chances that this Northern Ontario background has very much to do with your own, I know, is pretty slim. But whatever your background, I urge you to develop the self-awareness to understand what can get you jumping out of bed in the morning with enthusiasm. Because it's this motivation that you're going to need to harvest in this next stage of your life. Living a bit later in time, what my parents were unable to teach me was how to plan a strategic course through university and a career. So I made some mistakes, I encountered some failure, but I had some good fortune too. I describe this because I think it's important to understand you'll undoubtedly make mistakes. You'll experience some failure, but you can recover from both. Mistakes and failure can be our best teachers, as long as you're willing to learn from them and keep up your enthusiasm for trying. In the category of mistakes and recoveries, I have to say it was not always my life plan to study law. Instead, it was an accident. Where I find myself today might be considered a series of 5 accidents. So the first accident was law itself. After high school, I set out for Queens with a plan to practice medicine. I was going to be a pediatrician. However, by second year, I'd switched both universities and study programs after a scary first encounter with physics. My life plan to pursue medicine was then abandoned when I was convinced by a boyfriend to write the LSAT with him as a walk-in the very next weekend. Before my parents could catch their breath from this turnaround, I was in law school here at Western. Luckily, I loved it. The challenge of moving from science to law was a tremendous motivator for me. Accidents 2, 3, and 4 involved a number of changes in direction in the early beginnings of my career. I switched my practice specialty once and law firms twice in the first 5 years, at a time when move-in firms was quite unusual. I articled at a firm here in London, Ontario. I then started first-year practice in tax at one Toronto firm, and then moved into a securities law practice at another firm. Accident 5 happened after I'd been a partner for some time. In the middle of my M&A practice, I was convinced to move into the leadership side of our firm, at a time when I had, and you'll relate to this, absolutely no intention of ever doing such a foolish thing. In my experience, law firms generally like to give these types of jobs to the people who don't think they want them. You might wonder why I told you about these so-called accidents, other than to succeed in describing myself as a pretty flaky and flighty character. Well, I think there are 3 lessons from this that might be helpful. First, Don't despair if you haven't figured out your entire life plan yet. Life will serve you up lots of surprises. It's how you cope with these surprises and turn them into opportunities that will distinguish you. Second, don't be afraid to make mid-course adjustments. There's nothing sadder than stubbornly sticking to a bad idea. And finally, sometimes, oftentimes, change takes courage. Don't shortchange yourself and refuse to pursue something because of fear. Have confidence in your abilities and go after what you want. If you don't, you'll have failed by default. I'd be remiss today if I failed to mention that along this journey, I married my husband and later became the mother of my 2 wonderful sons who are now teenagers. Neither of these life-changing events were exactly accidents, but nor were they well-developed plans when I was sitting where you are. Quite the contrary. You can count on it, life indeed will take you by surprise. I'll concede that reconciling the priorities of family life with the demands of private practice is absolutely not easy. But I wouldn't have had it any other way. Moving next to the I'm ancient theme, depressing as that is. The private practice of law and the world around us has changed dramatically during my career, which is roughly coincident with your lifetimes. However, aside from minor technological advances like the World Wide Web, which forever changed access to information in a way that it's interesting to reflect on when you go back to a much earlier time, and the BlackBerry, that introduced fundamental change to the speed and the tone of communication in business. Until recent times, the way in which we practice law had actually changed very little. As both an M&A lawyer and in my leadership role, I've had to become an amateur student of economics. And it's this economics backdrop that I'll look to today in framing the past and the present environment for private practice. In the last 25 years, there have been 4 recessions, 5 if you go back to 1980. In this period, there were also 4 economic slowdowns that were not quite recessions. And right now, you're probably thinking, why in the world is this woman talking about recessions on today of all days? So stay with me on this. I tell you this not to relive grim past economic events on a day of celebration, but to remind you that recessions are a necessary part of the business cycle, and that life in the world economy does indeed go on. Economic uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it's a reality we all adjust to eventually. I graduated law school in a recession year. I began practicing in what was then the worst recession since the Depression, when few were being hired in Canada's law firms, and I've experienced a host of downturns since. On the flip side of these business cycles, I also enjoyed 2 of the largest and enduring M&A waves in North America. The transaction practices of North American law firms grew exponentially as a result of these waves. And if I hadn't switched the city in which I practice and my area of specialty, I wouldn't have caught either of these waves. I hope you'll find it reassuring to understand that in times of economic downturn, there are still opportunities. And I believe there's no reason to think this will not be equally true for you in your careers. The critical thinking skills you've acquired by studying law are going to stand you well, no matter what you choose to pursue. Which takes me to my final theme. Am I arrogant enough to try to predict the future of private practice? Turns out I am. Looks like the end of lawyers and the lawyer bubble abound, as do sensationalist articles on just how dire it is. Well, it's different, but in North America at least, it's not dire. Compared to other industries, law is still relatively stable. It's true that growth in North American law firms is not what it was pre-2008. It's more like it was in the 80s and 90s when I started to practice. On the other hand, foreign emerging markets remain underserved by the number of lawyers available. In-house practices are increasingly sophisticated places in which to practice and have a career. And legal regulation continues to thrive. Following the near-death experience brought to us by the subprime debt crisis of 2008, and more recently, the issues in the banking system of the European Union, the legislature is busy. It's not getting simpler, it's getting more complex to navigate the intersection of business and law. So I fully agree with the perspective recently expressed by Professor Epstein of New York University. If students like me benefited from a law school education 30 years ago, when the world was much simpler, they will still do so today in a vastly more complex world. Individuals in business will always need legal advisors. Wisdom and judgment are just not ever going to be available via a Google search. But private practice must necessarily adapt and innovate, and I believe that your generation will be instrumental in this innovation. I'll conclude today with 7 hopes that I have for each of you as you begin this next stage of your lives. They are these. I hope you encounter failure early on in your career, because it's from failure that you'll learn resilience for the long game, and will also learn to be less complacent about success. Complacency is a dangerous spot in which to reside for very long. I hope you encounter adversity, because it's from adversity that you'll grow in confidence when you prevail. Something hard won is more valued than that handed to us. I hope you encounter incompetence, because this will help you distinguish those practitioners who are truly outstanding and worth emulating. I hope you encounter dishonesty, because this will allow you to prove to yourself that your integrity will endure when tested. Your reputation is your most precious asset. Building a good one is difficult. Losing it through bad choices is incredibly easy. I hope you experience little serenity in your career beginnings, because this will mean that you're fully engaged and committed, driven to learn all that you can, and likely thriving and having fun. I hope you discover what you're not good at, because then you'll capitalize on what you're great at. I hope you work to your strengths to make a difference in what you do. And at the end of your careers, I hope that your professional accomplishments are not your most valued ones. Instead, I hope you've made time and effort throughout your busy work lives to enjoy the people who are most important to you, so that they're there to help celebrate your accomplishments, as is the case here today. That will be success. I'll end today with a quote from another woman's convocation address. Success is to live your life with integrity and not give in to peer pressure to be something you're not. Stay true to yourself. Never follow someone else's path. Unless you're in the woods and you're lost and you see a path, then by all means, take it. Thank you.